But I know it's gonna take me a minute. But you see, like, I feel really bad, I wanna help people, but then they get like really awkward, so I don't know how to act around them. And I'm like,
I'm just really crazy, so
it's just
some
works.
people accept it, other people just like, how far is it not?
Sure.
Alright. Welcome everyone to our presenter, Cindy Powell, and we thank you all for being here. I'm Keenan Wright, and I'm a senior at Harrison High School, aka the best high school ever. So today, Cindy Powell will be presenting disability etiquette. And actually, I have a few things I would like to say about Cindy Powell before we begin. Alright.
If you'd like to sign in and grab some handouts, please feel free. Yay, we've got some guys in here.
Gotta balance it out. Alright, so I'm gonna read a little bit about Cindy and we'll begin. So Cindy Powell is the Executive Director for community-based private nonprofit ACO Foundation, a premier resource in providing public, customized disability and sign language training. So Cindy provides customized training on the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, tax incentives, and other helpful topics such as disability etiquette and service animals. And I mean, her service is really something that's stellar, you know. Over the past 4 decades, Ms. Powell has advised businesses, employers, government agencies, and nonprofits about the best practices with people and with disabilities. So Cindy has served on state, local, and national disability organization boards of directors. So we're talking state, national, we're just up here now. So Ms. Powell was the recipient of an International Association of Workforce Professionals 2006 Services to Specialized Population Award. Cindy's disability articles appear in print and online. And actually, before our presentation begins, we actually have a gift for Ms. Powell. So on behalf of the Educating Children of Color organization, we would like to present you with this commemorative poster illustrating the theme of our 7th annual Act Now and Youth Be the Change. This artist has a special patron for the Educating Children of Color organization.
Thank you very much. It's lovely.
Thank you.
Okay. We're going to do a shortened version of this. I did bring a 33-minute DVD, a disability etiquette DVD that was actually locally released, but because of time constraints that we're starting later, we'll just go ahead and not show that today. Okay. Thanks for advancing the slides for me. Yeah, I don't have a remote for the slides. Just a little bit about ASO. We've been around, our parent company's been around since 1969, but we've been around since January of 2002. We're a nonprofit foundation. Not only do I go around and provide customized disability and sign language trainings, we also have therapeutic horseback riding at our office down in Canyon City for people who have disabilities. And then locally here, we have one-to-one reading tutoring for people who have disabilities. It's a local program actually called, gosh, I'm forgetting right now. Let's move on to the next slide. Our main office is in Longmont, and we have offices in Denver Metro. Our largest region here is Colorado Springs. We have the Canyon City office that we just recently opened up, and we have an office in Windsor. So we're serving a whole lot of people who have disabilities, as well as the public, educating them about disabilities. Okay. 19% of Americans disclose disabilities. So we're talking about a whole bunch of people, and not just people who have disabilities, but their friends or family members. So almost all of us Americans are affected by disability somehow. And these are some of the training topics. And I can always come to your schools or any clubs you belong to if you'd like to have any of these kinds of trainings. Okay. I also do ASL trainings at Rampart. They do, we were talking earlier, they do teach ASL. ASL is the third most used language in the US. First is English, second is Spanish, and third is ASL. So we have a large population of people here who use ASL as a primary language, so it's a really good language to learn. Not only do I do a 14-hour course, but I do specialized 4-hour workshops where I teach people what they need to know to continue to learn independently. Okay. And this tells, okay, Different Drums, the name of our reading program. It's all positive reinforcement. It's all directed toward what does the person want to learn how to read. There's one young man who had an intellectual disability. He wanted to work toward getting his driver's license. So that's what they focused on, teaching him how to read and understand the contents of the manual so that he could pass the test. All right, and this tells a little bit about our therapeutic horseback riding, and that's our horse that we use for therapeutic horseback riding. Okay. All right, we're going to start out with a disclaimer here. This is simply informal guidance today. Okay. We're going to talk about how frequently does disability occur and which disabilities occur most frequently. We're going to talk about just some basic etiquette tips in dealing with people who have disabilities. We're going to talk about disability-specific tips, and then a few resources for you for posters and a little booklet. Okay, you have a true or false questionnaire there if you'd like to follow along, and please feel free to blurt out the answers. True or false? The nation's largest minority group is people with disabilities. That is true, okay? 56.7 million Americans disclose disabilities, and it's the only minority group that any of us could join as a result of accident, illness, or injury. Okay. We're talking about a whole bunch of money to discretionary income, so programs that go out of their way to accommodate people with disabilities are going to get all of their business and their friends and family members' business as well. Okay. Now let's talk about that 56.7 million figure. Which disability, it's kind of loud, I'll shut this. Which disability do you think is 50% of that 56.7 million figure?
Is it B?
B? Brain? Okay.
Wheelchair users?
Deaf or hard of hearing. So 50% of people who have disabilities are deaf or hard of hearing. Okay, how about 25% of that figure? That would be B, okay? Brain, and that includes people who have intellectual disabilities, traumatic brain injury, and psychiatric disability, okay? 6% of that figure? Blind, okay? Only 2% of people who have disabilities use wheelchairs. But you'll notice all the signage is wheelchairs. Why? It's the most visible disability. Okay. True or false? Most disabilities are visible and therefore easily detected. False. Most disabilities are invisible. When you first meet the person, you can't detect that they have a disability. And here's just a partial list of examples of invisible disabilities. Where you can find a really good comprehensive list would be askjan.org, and that stands for Job Accommodation Network. They have disability-specific accommodation examples, and you can get a really good list there. This is just a few examples of invisible disabilities. Okay, true or false? The largest barrier for people with disabilities is other people's attitudes. False. True, absolutely. Okay, so many people are afraid they're going to say or do the wrong thing, so unfortunately, people with disabilities sometimes get ignored because you're uncomfortable. Okay, real important to remember that the disability is such a secondary part of the person. Even if it's really visible, somebody has cerebral palsy in your class and maybe athetosis, they have involuntary movement. Some people, that's all they would notice about that person. Truly, it's just a small part of who that person is, just like what color are our eyes, what kind of car do we drive, okay? True or false, do not attempt to shake hands with somebody who has a prosthetic arm. False. Their prosthesis is their hand or their arm. And if you're uncomfortable reaching out and shaking their prosthetics, then offer your other hand so that when they cross over, it will be the hand that they do have, okay, if they only have one prosthetic, okay? One thing that's really important too, a privacy issue, not to ask people who have disabilities, were you born that way, or did you get it? You know, that's a personal question. So if the person wants to disclose to you, they'll talk to you about it openly if they're comfortable and they trust you, okay? Another thing, people who have intellectual disabilities, people used to use the R word to refer to people who have intellectual disabilities. Actually, it's against the law to use that R word, and everybody knows what I mean by the R word. Okay, there was a law that passed in 2008 called Rosas Law, and it's against the law to have that R word in any federal documents. Okay, so now the acceptable terminology is intellectual disability for somebody whose learning might be somewhat slower or significantly slower than the norm. Okay, but it's really important that if somebody has an intellectual disability, even if it's profound and their intellectual level of functioning might be like a 2-year-old, still, chronologically, if they're your age, you're going to treat them like a peer your age. You're not going to baby talk them or be condescending just because intellectually they appear to be more like a preschooler. Okay, respect, that's just the most important thing. And act toward people who have disabilities the same way you would act toward people who don't disclose disabilities. Okay? True or false? It is inappropriate to use common phrases like, "Do you see that?" to a person who's blind. False. All people use figures of speech. I have a really good friend who has multiple sclerosis. She uses a wheelchair, and she's real athletic too. She does mono skiing, those kinds of things. At lunchtime, she likes to go out with her wheelchair to the park. She doesn't come back to the office and say, "I wheeled around the park." At lunch, she said, "I went for a walk." Okay? It's fine to say, "Did you hear that?" to somebody who is deaf. Okay? Figures of speech are just fine. 5 really good, important words for you to think about are common sense, good faith, effort. Just treating people the way you treat everybody else. True or false? Most people who are deaf can read lips. False. Lip reading is a very difficult skill. Only 30 to 40% of sounds can be seen on the lips. Vowels are really easy to lip read. Consonants are difficult. You know, English is the most difficult language to learn in the world because we learned I before E, except after C, except for C, seizure, leisure, neither. So we have exceptions and exceptions to the exceptions. We also will have a word with 3 A's, and they're all pronounced differently. So English is very, very hard. And if you've never heard, if you've been deaf from birth, and you haven't seen how those sounds appear when somebody's saying them, then lip reading is probably not even going to be a possibility. Okay? True or false? All people who are deaf learn and use sign language. False. Okay? Some people who are deaf learn sign language. Okay? True or false? Look at and speak to the interpreter rather than the person who is deaf.
False.
False. Always use first person. I, me, you. As an interpreter, sometimes I'll ask people, have you used a sign language interpreter before? No. Let's talk about some ground rules. I always try to sit next to the person who's hearing, so the person who's deaf and hearing can look at each other. And I tell them, use first person. If you say tell him, I'm going to sign tell him. So just saying I, me, you, having that direct conversation. The interpreter is only there to convert your voice to sign and their sign to voice. Okay? If they do have some lip reading skills, it's even more difficult if you're chewing gum when you're trying to talk to them. Okay, so just think about those kinds of things. Eye contact, very important. Okay, we're going to do a really quick activity just to illustrate to you what it might be like, maybe small groups of 3 of you. to have an intellectual disability. Okay, so maybe the two of you. What I want you to do, when you look at these charts, your brain is going to tell you read the words. But what I want you to do is to recite the colors as quickly as you can. This is called a Stroop chart. It is actually used to diagnose ADHD and some intellectual disabilities on people. It requires you to use both hemispheres of your brain, which is very difficult to do. Automatically, what's going to happen when you try to recite the colors as fast as you can rather than the words, it's going to slow you down. Okay, so I just want you to take a few moments to try this, with your small group, reciting those colors as fast as you can.
Red, yellow, black, green, purple, yellow, red, orange, green, black, yellow, purple, red, orange, yellow, blue, red, black,
Green, red, blue,
Green,
yellow,
red, yellow, red,
blue,
green,
purple,
green.
purple, yellow,
Okay, try it again. Green, red, yellow, black.
Your brain wants you to read those words, not the colors.
yellow, green,
Blue, green, purple,
Yellow, blue, orange, black, yellow, red,
yellow,
green,
red,
purple,
black, and green.
green, black, blue, red,
It's hard.
It's hard to ignore those words, isn't it?
You saw the changes for our 15 minutes.
Oh, okay, so we're. Okay. This Stroop chart is truly a simulation of what it's like to have an intellectual disability. Some of your peers at school that learn slower, their brain is telling them, I want to say or do this, but there's a barrier, something else occurs. Okay, so I'll take those, on your way out, you can drop your charts off at the front since I only have a few of them. Okay, true or false, it is acceptable to pet service animals.
True, but you have to
False.
ask.
Okay, always ask first. I'm absolutely crazy about dogs. If I absolutely have to pet that golden retriever that's a service dog, I'm going to ask first, can I pet your dog? Otherwise, it could inadvertently cause an accident to the person. Let's say a person's blind, they have their service animal, you kneel down to pet the dog, they don't realize you're there, they could trip over you. Okay, so always ask first, may I pet your service animal? There were some real significant changes to the law that became enforceable on March 15th of 2011 pertaining to service dogs. I mean, I could do a whole training on that topic. We're just going to say don't pet service animals for now since we have a short amount of time here, okay? True or false? Ask before assisting a person who has a disability. True. Always ask first. My friend that I was telling you about that goes for a walk during lunch, she uses a wheelchair. And when she's going to a store, somebody will see that she's coming toward the door, they'll run real fast and open the door to her. And then they think, well, she has attitude when she goes, I can open the door myself. Okay. No, she doesn't have attitude. People with disabilities want to be independent like people who don't have disabilities. If she wants somebody to open the door, she's going to ask them to do that. Okay. It's okay if you see somebody struggling, can I assist you? And if they say yes, ask them, how can I assist you? Wait for instructions. Don't just assume that somebody, especially if they use a wheelchair, a walker, another aid for mobility, that they need your help. They'll ask you for help if they need help, or, like I said, they're struggling, you ask them, and you wait for them to tell you how you can best help them. Okay, true or false? People with disabilities consider their mobility devices to be part of their personal space.
Oh, yeah.
True. That wheelchair is their legs. It's an extension of their body. Okay, prosthetics are an extension of their arm if they have hands. So We need to stay out of that personal space. If somebody's in a wheelchair, we don't want to get really close. We want to give them the same respect of space that we give people who are ambulatory. True or false? Stand while conversing with a person who uses a wheelchair. False. Okay, you want to sit down, especially if you're going to have a lengthy conversation. If somebody's in a wheelchair, pull up a chair and look to them eye to eye. Can you imagine being a person who uses a wheelchair? Almost everybody stands and walks. How's your neck going to feel at the end of the day, looking up all the time? Okay, so face-to-face contact, that's respectful. Okay, I think that we already talked about that. Don't touch somebody's wheelchair, their walker, their quad cane. Okay, that's part of their personal space. True or false? Parking spaces reserved for people with disabilities should be called handicapped parking.
I feel like it's wrong, but I've always told.
False. The H word is actually considered derogatory. Okay, it's like using the N word with somebody who's African American. You're not going to say handicapped. Okay, what's the origin of that word handicapped? Actually, panhandling. Before, people with disabilities, they didn't have any money, they'd put their cap out and people would put coins in there. So it's considered derogatory. The preferred terminology now is accessible parking, accessible restrooms, okay? So if you hear somebody using the H word, instead of saying, no, don't say that, they're gonna know that, well, I said the wrong thing. What are they supposed to say instead? Very important when you're correcting people, you give them the desired response. Okay, so if you hear somebody, oh, look at that's a handicapped restroom. Oh, the acceptable terminology now is accessible restroom. So when you correct them, you are telling them what they should say instead so that they won't repeat the same mistake. Also, how many of us like that negativity? No, don't. Okay? You always want to redirect people and give them the desired response. Okay? When having difficulty understanding, it is inappropriate to ask someone to write down what they're trying to say. False. Any way that you can get information from people, another really important thing, you know, if somebody has cerebral palsy and they talk slow, be patient. Give them time to finish their sentence instead of butting in and trying to finish for them. That's rude. That's like you're telling me something and I'm putting my hand over your mouth, okay? Please don't do that. Give them time to express themselves. And in this day and age, multitasking, everybody's trying to do everything in such a hurry. It's real hard for us to be patient. But once again, it's respect, okay? We want to treat others the way we want to be treated, okay? One thing I often do too, if somebody's speech is unintelligible, you know, I can ask them, please talk a little slower or one word at a time so that you might get the information. Or if somebody says something and I kind of think I understood them, but I'm not quite sure, I can ask them back in a question. I can paraphrase what I think they said so they can acknowledge, yes, I said that, no, I didn't say that. Okay. True or false? Refer to the person rather than the person's disability first. True, absolutely. And we're going to spend a lot of time on person-first language today, okay? The language that we use really subconsciously reflects how we feel about people who have disabilities, okay? And so, just the few things we're going to talk about today about person-first language. Now that you know this information, you're automatically obligated to be advocates for our nation's largest minority, people who have disabilities. If you hear people say inappropriate language, you're going to correct them positively with the desired response so they don't make a mistake. I think the media is probably the worst offender of using politically incorrect language, and they reach hundreds of thousands of people. So if you hear the news anchor says this person suffers from blindness, that's totally inappropriate, then, oh, it's okay to say suffers from. Saying that a person with a disability suffers from any condition is condescending. It's like implying that their life is less than, and that's probably not the truth, okay? So you all have this handout here, your words, our image. This is from the University of Kansas Lifespan Institute, and it's probably my favorite handout. Every year they update this. This is the 8th edition. But one thing I love about this, remember when we were talking about correction? Instead of saying don't, you can always redirect them with do. So there's a column of inappropriate terminology when referring to people who have disabilities and what you should say instead. Yes?
When you were talking about how like we're obligated to not correct people, but like show them the correct way to say things. I remember I was sitting with my friend Malia, and there's this little girl in front of us. She was about 9. I don't think her parents like talked to her about disabilities. So she was looking back like, I don't know what's wrong with her, like what's wrong with her. And so I was like, would you like to sit with us and we can like have a conversation with her and hang out with her? And her parents got really mad at me. Like, how do I deal with that? Like,
Yeah, just saying the only way we're going to learn is to interact with this person. I don't know if any of you have seen my good friend Alfie. He graduated from Fort Carson High School, I think, in the 80s. He has no arm, he's African American, he has no arms or legs, and he uses a power chair. He goes all over town, so you know what he does when he sees somebody staring, he has a great attitude. It's like, this is my opportunity to educate, okay? So once again, remember we were talking about how people meet people with disabilities and they're uncomfortable, they're afraid they're gonna say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. So those parents, no, we're curious, we want to learn, we want to give this person an opportunity to educate us. So that's approaching it positively. So Alfie, he'll see somebody staring at him. So, you know, the kids and the parents are always uptight, no, no, no. You know, and he'll walk up, oh, I noticed you were looking at me. Let me tell you a little bit about my condition. And then the parent, because he's so personal, he's such a friendly guy, the parents will start to relax a little bit more. But it's like, no, 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 that's rude. No, it's rude to stare. It's not rude to sit down and interact with that person to learn. Okay, because it'll help you in the future with other people you meet with a similar condition.
yeah, that's what I thought you were supposed to do, but then, I don't know, I guess the parents just started like yelling at me. I was like, I'm just going. I just really nice.
And earlier we were talking about how your generation is so fortunate in that because, you know, Public Law 94-142 passed in 1975. That was after I graduated from high school. It's now called IDEA, okay, for special education students. And when I went to high school, I graduated from high school in the early 70s. I never saw people with disabilities. Why? They were all in institutions, or their parents were ashamed and kept them at home and didn't send them to school, and they didn't get charged with truancy. Because of the laws, the Americans with Disabilities Act passed on July 26th of 1990. So since you've been born, you've grown up with kids with disabilities. They've been a part of your classes from preschool on. I didn't have that experience. Thank goodness for these civil rights laws, because now people with disabilities are part of our community, and that's the way that it should be. Okay, so let's go through this handout here. It's, remember, a person is a person, not a diagnosis. I want to really spend some time on person first language with you today. If there's anything I want you to walk away with is, I'm going to start using appropriate language when referring to people who have disabilities. And if I hear somebody say some of these inappropriate words, I'm going to positively correct them and tell them what is acceptable instead, okay? And we can do that tactfully, okay? Like if we hear somebody use the N word, of course we're gonna correct them, right? So we're gonna do the same thing, correcting people when they use wrong language when referring to people who have disabilities. The first one, and, is afflicted, and the ones in the red, those are the words you should not be using, okay? And is afflicted with cerebral palsy. What should you say instead? Has, and has cerebral palsy. Okay, very good. And if you have heard anything else, you know, around town where people have used language talking about the same condition, please share that with us, okay? We want to know. Bobby is autistic. Has autism. Bobby has autism, okay? Carol is brain damaged. Carol has a brain injury, okay? Disabled people need handicap parking. There's two bad words in that sentence. What should we say instead? People with disabilities benefit from accessible parking or require accessible parking, okay? But never disabled people, people with disabilities, people who have disabilities, people who disclose disabilities. And let's make it positive, benefit from accessible parking, okay? Accessible, A-C-C-E-S-S-I-B-L-E, okay? Eric is a deaf mute. Ooh, that one makes me cringe. Back when I was growing up, the 50s or 60s, you'd hear people say deaf and dumb, deaf mute. Okay. The appropriate terminology now is simply deaf. Eric is deaf, or Eric is hard of hearing. Okay. And just a bit of trivia for you. If somebody, you see the word deaf with a capital D, that means that the person identifies with their minority subculture, the deaf community. They're proud of their identity, just like we're proud of our ethnicity. They're proud of being a person who is deaf, okay? The lowercase d, if you just see the word D-E-A-F without the capital D, that simply indicates the hearing loss. But the capital D is like, I'm proud of being who I am. I don't want a cochlear implant. I want to be part of my community of people. This is how I was born, this is who I am, and I'm proud, okay? Fran is differently abled. Okay. This is almost obnoxious and to the point of being offensive. Somebody's going out of their way trying to be politically correct, then it's offensive.
Like you can tell that I want to say, Fran is differently able.
Uh-huh. Fran has a disability, okay? That's perfectly acceptable. George is epileptic, has epilepsy. George has seizures, okay? You don't even want to really use the word disorder anymore because once again, that's negative. It implies less than quality of life, okay? Hannah has fits if she does not take her medication. That could be construed two different ways. Okay, Hannah has seizures. She doesn't take her anticonvulsants. She doesn't take her medications. Or Hannah has behaviors, undesired behaviors, if she doesn't take her psychotropic medication. So if she doesn't take her meds, we might see some behaviors. Okay, the next one has two bad words. The Joneses have two children. One is crippled and the other is normal. Very offensive. To this day, the Shriners, they do such good things for people with disabilities. To this day, if you're at a cash register paying for something, you'll see that little clear thing to put coins in. It says, give money to crippled children. It just makes me cringe. Their intentions are good, but that crippled word is something from the 60s, definitely derogatory, should not be used. Okay, what should we say instead about the Jones family? The Jones have two children, one has a disability. There's no such thing as normal. What is normal? Not
exactly.
Nobody knows.
Everybody else.
not one of us in this room is normal. We're all unique human beings to be respected for our individual differences. Same thing with people who disclose disabilities. Okay, this is my hearing impaired friend Kevin. What should we say instead?
This is my friend Kevin who has a hearing impairment.
Yeah. Why would you even really need to bring up the disability? But if you did disclose it, this is my friend Kevin. He is deaf or he is hard of hearing. Okay? The next one is really one of my pet peeves. Laura is my mentally challenged employee. My employee Laura has an intellectual disability or she has a developmental disability. Remember, it's against the law to use that R word in any federal document. It's a law, Rosas law. Mark is mentally ill. Now this is a big one where you still even hear professionals in the mental health field use that word, those words mentally ill, but people with psychiatric disability do not appreciate the word mental illness or mentally ill. So if you hear somebody say that person's mentally ill, oh, the acceptable terminology now is has a psychiatric disability. And sometimes people say, well, God, we're just going out of our way to be politically correct. But once again, it's a respect thing. Okay. Nancy is a midget. What should we say instead of midget? Okay, yeah. Nancy has dwarfism, okay? Nancy has small stature. People who have dwarfism sometimes refer to themselves as little people. So she's a little person. That's fine as well. Just FYI, you know, in the past you've heard the word dwarf or midget, okay, which are both derogatory. A little person, short stature are acceptable. What's the difference between the two? It's all about proportion. Okay, people that formerly were referred to as midget, they're just shorter than us, they're proportionate. People with dwarfism, from the waist up, are about the same size as us, but from the waist down, they're disproportionately smaller. That's dwarfism, okay? And there's over 100 kinds of dwarfism. Achondroplasia is the most common, but you can just say it has short stature as a little person. The next word, I noticed one thing about your generation, and I'm happy about this. You've never heard this word, mongoloid. That's wonderful, I'm so happy you haven't. Back when I was growing up, people used that word to refer to people who have Down syndrome, okay? And why did they call it Mongolism? Did they? Because of epicanthal folds, okay? The middle folds of the eyes, they look kind of Asian. Okay, that's why it used to be referred to as Mongolism. Thank goodness younger people have never heard that word. It's a horrible word to use. So Oliver has Down syndrome, okay? But he has it. It's not, he's a Down syndrome child. He has Down syndrome. Remember, people first, the person, and then mention of their condition appropriately, okay? Priscilla is a mute. She can't talk. Or she uses sign language to communicate. Okay, she uses a communication board. Once again, the positive. Maybe she doesn't use speech like we do, but she can still communicate, just in a different way. What's wrong with that? Okay. And one thing I love about your generation, these respectful, the political correctness and respectful things, you're just automatically doing so much of this. My generation, no, I'm correcting people of my generation all the time when they say the H word or the R word, you know. Roger is a special ed student. What should you say instead? Roger receives special education services. Okay. Special ed student. Right away that conjures up that image of the short bus, you know, that comes up to your house to pick up a child who has a disability. So he receives special education services. So Roger's a person. He's receiving some services that a lot of people don't. Okay, the suffers from, I hate that. Susie suffers from blindness. Okay. Susie is blind, or Susie has low vision. Just another bit of trivia. What is blindness? Does that mean that they can't see light or dark? No, it means 2200 acuity. Okay, what does that mean? That means somebody with perfect vision, when they can see 200 feet away, that person has to be 20 feet up to see. That's legally blind. Low vision is 20/70 acuity. Most of us who are in this room who are wearing glasses have at least that, so we would be considered a person with a low vision unless we had our glasses on. That's 20/70 acuity. So that means somebody with that 20/20 vision, that perfect vision, can see something 70 feet away, and that person has to be 20 feet up to see. Okay. So blind or low vision. Tom works with the disabled. The or the anything is derogatory. The deaf, the blind, the disabled. Okay, so what should we say instead about Tom? Perfect. Tom works with people with disabilities. Tom works with people who have disabilities. Disclose disabilities. Okay, we have two bad words in the next one. Vanessa was a victim of polio and is wheelchair bound. What should we say instead? So Vanessa had polio as a child, and she uses a wheelchair. And my friends who use wheelchairs, they don't mind if you call them a wheelchair user. That's fine with them. And some of you might be thinking, well, this is ridiculous that we're spending this time. No, it's not. Because every single day we hear people use inappropriate terminology. And we want to give respect to that largest minority group, people who have disabilities. So I want to make sure that you know what you can tell people when you hear them use these red words. Okay, and the last?
Visually impaired
Because impaired, also, it's a negative connotation, so it also implies less than. Most people who, my friends who are hard of hearing, they hate when you call them hearing impaired, because, once again, that says less than. So, is hard of hearing. Deaf or hard of hearing are both acceptable terminology. Now that poster I gave you, here's the link where you can get a PDF online. And they have, you know, the bigger posters you can order, I think they're $3 a piece. And also, there's a wonderful, wonderful booklet, okay? There's the PDF. Once again, University of Kansas Lifespan Institute. It's my favorite disability etiquette things. United Spinal Association puts out a really good disability etiquette book, but it takes maybe 20 minutes to read. You can read this one here, the guidelines for reporting and writing about people with disabilities, in 10 minutes or less, and it has some really good disability-specific examples. Okay. We are a nonprofit. We'd be happy to accept any charitable contributions. Okay. And what we do is the contributions that we receive, we spend on providing services to people who have disabilities that aren't provided anywhere else. For example, let's say a person who has a disability, they're working in the community. We all know the bus system here is horrible, Colorado Springs. Anchorage, Alaska has better public transit than Colorado Springs. So they work in retail, so they work weekends, so there's no bus to take them to work. Their car breaks down. Are they gonna have to quit their job? No, they could apply to my foundation for funding for car repair because no other program would pay for that. So that's how our charitable contributions, that's what it goes for, okay? I do a lot of trainings in the community, and so you can find out about them this way. And you do have a flyer here with some of my upcoming trainings, okay? You know, I'll take donations for any of my trainings except for my sign language trainings. There is a fee for. I've written a lot of articles that you can use in your school newspapers or however you want to use them. This is how you would request training. And, you know, is what Cindy says or does reputable? A lot of people will tell you, you know, it is, or some of the people that have been to my training, so if you need to check references. I'm a phone call or an email away if you want any information on disabilities. Like I said, I'm happy to come to your school if you want to talk about the issue. Now, I do have a 33-minute DVD, which I guess we'll have time to watch now because we have the full time allotted. If you want to stay to watch this DVD, you can. If you don't want to stay, you know, you can feel free to leave. I do request that if you have a few moments to please fill this out for me so that I can have some feedback about the information today. Was it helpful to you at all? You don't have to put your name on it, so you know any of your comments, positive or negative, are definitely welcome. I do need to warn you that this DVD is somewhat corny, but it was released August 1st of 2008 here in Colorado Springs. It was produced here in Colorado Springs. But it did win awards at the Disability Film Festival in 2009. And it gives you the information that we talked about today and even more information. Because it came out in 2008, it talks about 54 million people who have disabilities. And it's 56.7, the most recent census. Yes.
I have a quick question. How come okay, I understand this. My dad has PTSD and TBI, and when he says that he was medically retired or whatever, in a full version room, how come our society doesn't accept like mental disabilities like that you can't tell right away are there?
Invisible disabilities, they can't detect it. So he is advocating for himself, disclosing to people that he has TBI or PTSD. Okay, so that's good that he's disclosing that. But society expects, remember when we asked about the 50% figure, people said, oh, wheelchairs. Remember, that's only 2%. Most disabilities are invisible. So unless people disclose those disabilities, nobody will know. So,
Thank you very much.
you're welcome. So because he happens to have those conditions, he acquired those conditions, he can be an advocate for himself and other people with his conditions to try and gain more acceptance. You know, when I grew up was the Vietnam War era. Most people who had injuries died back then because medical technology was not advanced. Now, because of medical technology, we're seeing so many people in our community who have TBI and PTSD because if they had an IED explosion or whatever, now they're living with medical, but the rest of their life is going to be different from previous to the injury. So the only way people are going to accept is familiarity. And so we need to just talk to people about these issues so that people will be more accepting with time. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
No? Okay. You want to show the DVD?
Well,
Let's see. Oops. It's got to go to the projector. You need to take the, oh, you're welcome. Thank God for him. I'm not a very tech savvy person. And the DVD does talk about 6 different disabilities. It doesn't address intellectual disabilities, which is why we did that short activity. Oops. Yes.
How hard do you think it is?
Well, that's a good question. I'm glad you talked about it. You're younger, so you're going to learn so much quicker than somebody who's older like me. It's called neuroplasticity. You know that 80% of learning occurs between birth and age 8. So after age 8, we only have 20% space left in our brains. That's why somebody in my age group, we have a lot of those senior moments. I can't accommodate new information. What you just said or did, gone. But because my brain's already filled with long-term information. Okay? So you would learn sign language a lot faster than your mom or dad, or if you have older brothers or sisters, because you have more neuroplasticity. You have more space in your brain to accommodate that new information. So you could learn pretty easily, compared to an older person. But what high school do you go to?
Sierra.
Sierra? Yeah, unfortunately Sierra, they don't teach sign there. Yeah, I know D20 they do.
I don't know why they don't teach sign in more schools. Like I was supposed to do a sign program over the summer, but I moved. So I know why they don't do it.
English, Spanish, and then ASL in our country. In Canada, English, French, and ASL, first, second, third most used language. As you know, we have Colorado School for the Deaf and Blind. Here we have a large deaf community, people that you can use your sign language skills with every day. So, and I teach a community ed class, a Tuesday night course. I also do that 4-hour workshop where I teach you enough so that you can continue to learn on your own. In that 4-hour workshop, I teach you all the handshakes used, which is the alphabet numbers, 24 basic phrases, but most importantly, through repetition, I indoctrinate those rules into your long-term memory. You understand things like two-handed signs, different hand shapes, only one hand, your dominant hand moves. You know those rules. You can look online, or you can look in a book and know how to do the signs. And I am going to be doing one of those workshops during the summer months. Here, yeah, I think it's July 22nd, yeah, I'm not sure. But, with that PowerPoint, you have links where you can check out and see what trainings are going on. So please feel free to come to, the workshop. Only 4 hours of training, and you know enough to continue to independently learn sign language. What? Yeah, sometimes. Some of my friends will say, Cindy, you don't have to do that. I say, sorry, I'm just used to talking and signing. Is the technology cooperating with us?
Yeah, it's technical difficulties, I'm not sure what to do.
Okay, yeah, we might have to forego the DVD if we can't get it to cooperate with the projector. The PowerPoint was fine, but the video maybe not. Any other questions or comments? Anything you'd like to share about some of the kids you've grown up with who have disabilities or that you go to school with? that have disabilities?
I had a friend, I don't know what his condition was, but, I kind of knew because he was going to different classes than me. The only class we would have together is PE, and like he would like to play with everybody, and he was a cool kid. We never really talked about it, like I never asked him what he, like really didn't matter.
Yeah, and if he wants you to know, he'll disclose. Like a lot of times people who have disabilities, if they're applying for a job, they don't want to disclose their disability because that's just going to be another possibility to subject them to discrimination. The employer might cite another reason for not hiring them. I always advise people with disabilities, if if you're qualified for the job, okay, you have the education, experience, background they're looking for, and you can perform the essential functions of the job with or without reasonable accommodations, you're qualified for that job. But if you don't require those reasonable accommodations, don't disclose, because that person, they'll find another reason to tell you why they didn't hire you when it was because you had a disability. That's against the law. It's Title I of the Americans with Disabilities Act. People with disabilities, if they're qualified for the position, they need to be considered for the position, not excluded just because they disclosed a disability. And there's tax credits available if they're deaf and they're qualified for the job and they need like a sign language interpreter for meetings. There are tax credits to small employers.
Yeah, my old school, we had a class, and then but they wouldn't learn what we would learn. They would go and work. They would learn how to do wash dishes and things like that. And
That's wonderful. It's giving them a job skill
Yeah.
so that they can be more independent as adults also. Maybe if they don't have the intellectual capacity to attend college, at least they're learning something vocational so they can work and earn an honest living. That's wonderful.
I've grown up with special needs kids around me my entire life, so I'm really comfortable around them. I remember I used to live here before. We moved around a lot because I was military, and there's this boy named Jonathan who went to my elementary school, and I can't remember the name of his disability, but he wasn't able to do a lot of things that a lot of other kids could do, but I don't know, I loved him. He was amazing, and he was in a wheelchair, and I remember walking away one day and how there were grown-ups talking about how he's not gonna